Girl Influence Power is brought to you by Collectin. Shop or run the world's tiniest boutiques with Collectin.
Today, our guest is the young, intelligent, and well-spoken professor and author Laura Huang. Laura is the author of the book Edge, Turning Adversity into Advantage. Her book, Edge, talks about how to gain an edge given the confines of who we are, where we are, and the circumstances that we have to work with in order to gain an edge and game the system of bias. Basically, anyone who understands how to master and navigate using Laura's principle can excel in work and life. Laura, or as her students would call her, Professor Huang, is currently a professor at Harvard Business School. As one of the best business school professors under the age of 40 by poets and quants, she spent her entire academic career studying interpersonal relationships and implicit bias in entrepreneurship and in the workplace. Laura, before her days as a professor, has previously held jobs in investment banking, consulting, and management, working for companies like Standard Chartered Bank, IBM Global Services, and Johnson & Johnson. Laura received Bachelor of Science and Master of Science in Electrical Engineering from Duke University, an MBA from INSEAD, and a PhD from the University of California, Irvine. So our common thread is that both Laura and I have parents that are first-generation immigrants from Taiwan, and both of us actually experience what I call the triple whammy. So we are women, we're Asian, and we're considered young for what we do. So, okay, well, you
Absolutely.
are young.
Oh, no, both of us are
young. I was young when I started my company, way back then when I was 20. But yes, you are young for a professor. And but also, yeah, you work for one of the most prestigious university in the world. So welcome, Laura.
Thank
it's
you.
Great to have
Such a pleasure to be here.
So it seems like you're really actually very good at gaming the system. So let's dive right in and let's talk more about you so our audience can get to know you.
Yeah, I mean, I've had to, right? To sort of talk about the triple whammy, right? Being a woman,
right.
being Asian, a person of color, having to. So, I think a lot of it is not so much about gaming the system, but really how do you gain that advantage? How do you gain that edge knowing that the odds are often stacked against you?
Right.
And it's not even something that's always purposeful. I think sometimes it's very implicit. People don't often recognize that they're bestowing upon you certain perceptions or attributions.
Right.
So this book was really about understanding these factors, understanding that there are going to be obstacles, there are going to be stereotypes.
Right.
And how can we turn these stereotypes in our favor?
Right. So anyway, your book has probably one of the best hooks in a business book. I was like, okay, I'm going to read this. So the person that was going to be tossed out of Elon Musk's office with no, that was actually you.
It was.
Okay, now, I know you mentioned in the book that you actually brought him a present, you and your colleagues. So what would you bring someone like him a present? Like what you bring him?
Yeah. So actually, we had prepared really, really hard for this meeting, right? Because and being the Asian person that I am, I'm like, we should bring him a gift too, right?
That's true. You don't go anywhere not bearing any gifts,
right? So
right.
Not only did we come sort of ready to bestow upon him our wisdom and our advice and things that we could contribute to both SpaceX and Tesla and all these sort of things.
Right.
My colleague and I actually brought him this gift, which was sort of this meaningful gift that was made out of materials from some of his products, right?
Really?
So it was made out of carbon fiber, which is what his space shuttles were made out of. So we brought him this gift, and unbeknownst to me, right, when we show up at his office, as you kind of alluded to, he threw us out. He basically, within 30 seconds, he looked at me and he said, "Get out of my office."
Was it the gift?
And so it took me a couple of seconds to realize, but that he actually wasn't looking at me. He was actually looking at the gift that I was carrying.
Oh, really?
Yes, it was. And so that's sort of what I talk about in the beginning of this book, how, very quickly I had to realize, this one of the most richest, most powerful men in the United States, Elon Musk, is throwing me out of his office. Why would that have been? And I realized that he thought we were entrepreneurs. He thought
looking for cha-ching.
That's right. Looking for resources, looking for money. And he's always getting asked for money.
I'm sure,
so his default answer has to be no. And he thought that the gift was a product prototype that we were trying to sell him on, and that we were entrepreneurs looking for his funding or his endorsement or something. So that was one of those perceptions that I had to recognize very quickly and try and flip in our favor.
Right. And you very skillfully did that.
Well, I don't know.
So you got to read the book to find out.
That's right. We're not going to give it away. We're not going to show how I turned Elon into from a man who was kicking me out of his office to giving me hugs and saying keep in touch on the way out. So yeah.
Nice. Now, so the book, did it start off with a thesis and then you went about proving it with research, or the concept was like, something you already was very interested in, your entire life?
Yeah, I mean, so this is something that I had been studying for about 10 years. I was studying disparities and disadvantage and stereotypes. And why is it that sometimes we work so hard, we put in so much hard work.
Right.
And we've been taught from a young age that hard work is the secret to success.
Right.
And yet at some point we realize that our hard work doesn't always speak for itself.
That's very true.
So that piece of it I had been studying for a while. But the book really came together when I was in the last couple of years where I was thinking, well, how can we actually empower ourselves, to achieve that sort of success and those outcomes.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. Because I think it's a skill that needs to be learned. It doesn't come naturally for everyone.
Oh, it's something that we think should come naturally, but it's really like a muscle. We have to build this muscle.
Right. I totally agree. So let's talk about your parents, because I know your parents, like mine, were also new immigrants to the States. And you talk about your mom being, going to the U.S. with pennies in her pocket.
Yep.
So what were their aspirations in going into the U.S.?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a very typical immigrant story, right? Like many others, my mother showed up to the United States with $22 in her pocket. And, I think her aspirations really were that she was looking for something we all look for. It's this aspiration. We're very aspirational. We know that we can do it. We know that we provide value. We know we can enrich, but we don't always know exactly how that's going to pan out. So I talk a lot about how she came to the United States and she really was going for directionality. She was going in a direction rather than saying, I need to achieve point A or point B. I'm going in this sort of direction.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah. She's actually very courageous, especially,
Yeah, she's a tough cookie. I mean, she is. She's, she has this ability to both be extremely tough, but also graceful at the same time. And so I think it's something that I've always strove for in my life as well.
Right. Because most every woman talk to, they always find their mom to be the most influential. I mean, in what ways, was she influential to you as you were growing up? Yeah.
I think it's changed over time, right? I think their relationships with their parents, I think over the course of their lifetimes do change. In the beginning, it's much more of they are an instructor, they're a teacher, they're sort of teaching you.
That's
and
true.
then they're sort of a companion watching you or like it or not, right? People don't want to always. And then they do turn into sort of a friend or a mentor. Or I think it evolves over time. And I think my mother and I have had that relationship. It's been ups and downs, right? It's been ups and downs where I've listened and I've revolted and I've listened and I've revolted. And I think we all have these complicated relationships, but I very much admire my mother and what she was able to do and the path that she was able to create for herself. So
now, are you teaching her now, since you're now kind of in a teaching position?
I don't think she would ever listen to any of my teaching. So,
okay.
It's more the tables have turned where now with my own children, it's seeing the circle. That,
You're seeing what your parents were doing with you.
And what I'm now doing with my parents and which parts of it I've kept and which parts of it I've totally tossed out. So.
That's totally true. And actually, what's funny with my father, it's like as they get older and I get older, I start lecturing them in a bit sometimes, like, you're actually not always right.
Yeah. And it is the hardest, I think, with people that we know really well in terms of trying to influence them or change their minds. To be so, my natural instinct is to just be like, okay, here are the reasons why you need to listen. Here are the reasons, but it takes such a different tactic, I realized, with my mother, where it's very much like, help me understand why you think, or like, tell me more about it. And it takes so much patience from me to not just be like, no, you need to do it this way. Right. So, it is like, I definitely do use my research in that sense.
Right. So do you use the enrich, delight, guide, and effort?
I do. I use that framework. And sometimes I think about like, oh man, my mother is not, I really need to think about how to delight in this situation, delight my counterpart so that she actually will listen to the pieces of it. So.
Because, actually, with parents, with siblings, like they know your trigger points, right?
Oh, and it's so easy to.
Right. You forget that, when you get emotional, you can't delight.
And it's so, even just in life too, right? It's so easy we really have to practice and be practiced about not bringing out those trigger points. I mean, even with my husband, right? I know exactly what will set him off. I can pinpoint something from like 10 years ago that if I want to win the argument, but piss him off tremendously. Like I know exactly. It's the same with our families, right? So we have to consciously be like, do I want to win this argument, or do I want to actually progress? Like, do we want to progress what we're trying to achieve here? And that's really hard. As humans, right? It's this constant struggle between what is it that we want to achieve in this moment. So.
That's true. Because as much as you can trigger, you also know your own triggers, so you can actually stop your own triggers from happening. When
I wish I was able to do that. I wish I was. I'm not quite as good at that as I am at the other piece of
because it's funny because I'm part of the CEO group called Vistich, and then there's 10, 15 CEOs, and we always get speakers to talk about the type of personalities we are, or the triggers that we have, or how to train ourselves to be able to spot these triggers and not go off on it. So it's funny you say that because because it is very hard. It is very emotional. But if you know how to use it and control it in the situation, then you can actually snap yourself out of it.
Absolutely.
So I know you have Taiwanese parents like mine, and mine are like very typical stereotypical of Taiwanese parents. Like, you got to get good grades, you got to learn piano, you got to be humble, don't speak up, don't be too assertive, especially if you're a woman. So how are you brought up? Was that same or different with your parents?
So I did learn the piano when I was younger. I was very heavily, school and education was something that my parents took very seriously. I think the difference was that my parents had all these aspirations, but I actually was not very good at anything when I was growing up. I really wasn't. I mean, I was not musical. I was not athletic. I was painfully shy. Didn't have a lot of friends. So one of the only things that I actually was good at was math and school. And so I think, and I also didn't really know what I wanted to be when I grew up. And so I think it was very frustrating for my parents from that sense, where they very much wanted me to excel in all of the things that social pressures, the Asian social culture told them to. Right? She should be musical, and she should be well-spoken, and she should get good grades, and all of these sort of things. But I think they were also very patient with me in the sense that they recognized that I wasn't really and so they did give me the space to kind of grow and develop into who I was going to be. So I think it was a little bit of both. I think they really did have a lot of that the traditional Taiwanese culture in them. But I think they also recognized that they were in a foreign land, and that they didn't really quite always understand what was happening either. And so there was this understanding that they needed to also be patient. So I credit them with that piece of that. But they were very strict. They were very strict parents.
Well, you got the math part, so
luckily, oh my gosh, fingers crossed that I at least, I mean, or you know, praised that I actually had one piece of it, so that they could always say, oh well, she naturally loves math, and so that was the one thing that I had going for me. And before any of your listeners are like rolling their eyes and saying, oh my gosh, she was good at math, remember, I actually was not very good at anything else.
Well, maybe you thought you were too hard on yourself. You thought you weren't, but you were actually really good. You just don't know it.
Well, it's been a journey. It's been a journey. Let's say that. So
now you were a cheerleader in high school. So did you vote? Did you get voted as most likely to be a professor?
No. So you can see how my parents had to be very, very patient. In fact, my mother was very, very upset that I was a cheerleader.
Really?
Yes, she was. And so she did this thing, and this was very much her style, right? So I was too young. I wasn't driving yet, right? So this was when I was 13, 14 was when I first made the cheerleading squad. And so my mother would refuse to pick me up from practices.
Oh, wow.
And so I would sit there and I would just wait for her to pick me up. And so she wanted to kind of show me that this was going to be difficult, like that I really wanted it. And it was in New Jersey, so it was cold. So she would basically say, oh, I'm not going to pick you up. I want you to and so she would purposely sort of make up excuses so that I would know. And then what happened was I started getting rides home from older boys who had their licenses. And so that was the end of that. She started picking me up. So that was one instance where I actually did outwit my mother.
Yes, that was a good one.
And I was a cheerleader for 4 years, all during high school, much to her dismay.
Oh, well, that's nice.
Nice for me, not as nice for her.
No, it's both. I think, sometimes parents, they do need to know. Like, kids have their own mind and they have their own, what they want to do with their lives, what they're interested in. And sometimes, you just let them be.
Yeah. Well, she had this, speaking of sort of stereotypes, and she had this stereotype that if my daughter is a cheerleader, she will never, she's going to not pay attention to school and to grades, and this is going to be the end of her future. But in fact, I actually think that it benefited me a lot. I mean, it really was, speaking of being someone who is painfully shy, it's something that like very quickly you learn how you learn presence, and you learn all of those sort of things. And I also, my grades didn't slip. It was something that, and I do think that it gave me this unique identity at a time when I really needed a unique identity. I was able to be someone who was seen as intelligent and smart, but also someone who was seen as like social and could be doing all of these other things. And so I was,
that's true.
And I think throughout my life, it's been bridging these multiple identities. Identities that often seem at odds with each other. But being able to find a way that makes it really work in a unique way for me.
That's true. Yeah, because I do believe like women back in the days, like we were raised like to be either one or the other. It was not like, they expected, well, if you're going to be a CEO or a woman or in business, then you got to act like a man. But that's not necessarily the case, because when I was growing up, I always questioned that too. Like, why do CEO women's or why do women in business have to look and dress like a man? Why can't we be beautiful and use what we have to gain an edge?
Yeah, I mean,
like, we could be both smart and very capable. Why not that? But
yeah, it's really about being authentically who you are, and recognizing that if you are who you authentically are, it will come with certain stereotypes and perceptions and negative attributions. But you can still be who you are and turn those and flip those in a way that do benefit you. So that's something that I've been studying for quite some time now, is exactly how can we be uniquely ourselves in a way that still gives us an advantage and gives us an edge in our lives.
Because I think the delight comes from, what you said, from genuine. I think people can tell when you're trying to be delightful or trying to delight them and you're not genuine. And I think I come across that a lot in business too. If you try to be something you're not, and then you try really hard, people can kind of see through that.
Eventually.
And it kind of works against you most of the time.
I think eventually. I mean, it is tough sometimes because because there are some people who are extremely good at impression management or being strategic.
True.
And so,
right.
You know, so I talk about how do you do this in a way that, because this is not about impression management or being strategic at all. This is about really showing people who you authentically are in a way that's going to be sustained and provide that edge for you throughout in any context that you might be in.
So it's like more natural, really.
Yeah.
Yep. And it's harder to keep up a front than to just be really the natural you. So now I've actually been asked before by a lot of like VC men during my fundraising, my first round. And actually one guy actually told me, like, why would you do a business where women help women? Like, aren't you guys just all naturally competitive? And I looked at him, I'm like, I think we're pretty much done here. Like, I don't think you understand women. I don't think you understand the business. Like, what do you think about that statement? Do you believe that women are just naturally competitive? Do you have any good examples to give us?
You know, what I think we forget sometimes is that there's a continuum, right? People always want to put things in a box. Like, do you think X or do you think Y? Do you think yes or do you think no? And I think there's always a continuum between everything, right? So there are definitely going to be those women who are, you know, sort of the queen bee syndrome, like women who are out for other women. And then I think there are also going to be those women who are genuinely want to be helping women and just basically elevating all women out there. And then I think there's everything in between.
Right.
And when there's everything in between, what happens is a lot of it is determined based on context, based on individual behaviors, individual factors. And so, you know, as much as people like to sort of say, like, where are you? Are you on this side or this side? There's really just, it's not just one side or the other. So I think throughout my career, I honestly seen both. I've seen both, and I've seen everything in between. I mean, I think early on in my career, some of the biggest supporters. I mean, I had one manager when I was at Johnson & Johnson who two managers, both of them women, and it was because of them that I had the opportunities that I had. They believed in me. They had my advisor in my PhD program was a woman, and you know, I think to myself, these are women who always had my best interests at heart. I never once had to think that there was some sort of ulterior motive, and that's really what you're looking for. You're looking for those people who you never even have to question whether or not they have your best interests at heart. And that's honestly what I look for in terms of the people I associate with, the people that I want to be with, because they also know that I have their backs in the same way. That it's going to always be. Sometimes they're going to be giving a lot more, and then other times I'm going to be giving a lot more. And it's not always going to be this one for one.
Yes.
But I've also, you know, encountered women who it's so transactional. If you give me something, I give you something. Or that as soon as you sort of outpace them, there's some sort of threat that they feel. So I've honestly experienced all of it. And I've had that with men as well, right? I've had men who have been tremendous mentors and champions of me. When I first joined as a professor at the Wharton School, one of the people that I still to this day, I mean, he is someone that I would just pick up the phone and call and has always had my back. But, you know, so I think it's all in our lives, all of us can identify.
That's true.
And what I think it really says about you is that you are someone who really wants to have the back of other women, and you want them to have your back. And that's something that's really, I think, a wonderful and tremendous thing. And we need people on that end of the continuum.
That's
and
true.
I think your VC, it says something about his nature and the way that he thinks about transactions and progress, and who there's so much room for lots of people to win, and lots of people to win in different ways. And so I think that's something that I've always tried to that's how I've tried to live my life and have the experiences and people, and I look out for those people, people who I will always want to support, and that will,
That's true. I mean, you usually just tend to not be with the people that you feel like, you know, are not kind of your believes in the same kind of beliefs that you have.
Yeah, I think the problem is when we're so socially, we are social animals.
Right.
And so it's hard to sometimes step back from it and realize, because there's so much hype around certain people or certain types of people or certain personalities. And we, and so that's what sometimes misguides us.
Right, that's true.
Yeah.
Now, I know one of your first jobs was like right after master's, you were offered a job at IBM.
Well, so the first offer actually that I ever had, the first job offer was actually for the CIA.
Oh, really?
Yes. And it was to the extent where they try and they like interviewed my first grade and my kindergarten teachers.
Oh.
Yeah, they try and like gather all this stuff. And I ultimately did not take that job, or maybe I did. I'm not saying no. But I ultimately did not take that job because my mom was actually really concerned with the fact that I was going to be learning armed weaponry. Like there was the training involved, all of that, and I wasn't going to be able to tell people what I was doing. And also now I can tell people because I never took that. But I did actually. I was trained as an engineer, and so the job had a technical component, but also I'm multilingual, so I speak multiple languages, and so there was lots of sort of things that was involved in that job. But I eventually I had always wanted to be a math teacher, and going back to what I was saying before about how I was not really good at anything, but math. I always adored all of my math teachers, and so that was something I wanted to do. And so one of my very first jobs was I took a job as a math teacher in an inner city school.
Oh, that's difficult.
There was, you would have to walk through, and they would have a metal detector, and there was a panic button next to the blackboard where
a panic button. That's the first.
So that it was really this sort of rough school, and I was really young. Right, this was I looked younger than
you still look young.
But I looked younger than most of the high school students, and yet I was trying to teach math, and I tell this story. I actually end the book with some stories about this because I still actually feel a lot of guilt. I think a lot of the reasons why I left that school very quickly. I was only there for half a year, and I feel like in lots of ways that I gave up on my students. I wasn't equipped. I wasn't yet ready to be that type of. I just wasn't. I didn't have the maturity. I didn't have the understanding. I think so much of what has guided me in terms of understanding disparities and understanding who has privilege and who has advantages and who is able to has been because of those students. And so I obviously stayed in education.
Right, exactly. Still
took a very different route, but the nonprofit, the charity that I've been working that I've started is, I think, a lot of it has originated from that. It's a nonprofit called Project EMplify, and it's really about empowering kids like the ones that I experienced when I was in that school. It's about kids who have given up on themselves in lots of ways, and I find that to be the saddest piece of it. It's people who have lost hope, or they've been told that they're not good enough, or that they don't prescribe to the right system, right? That you haven't worked hard, or that you're not good at school, and hence your future is going to be less than. And so Project EMplify, we have a book matching program, we have mentoring, and we have free educational programming. And so, someday I may decide that, I've had so many careers, I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. Someday I may say, like, I don't want to be a professor anymore, or that I don't want to be a professor at Harvard anymore, or that I don't want to, and that I'll go somewhere else and do something. But it's still very, very meaningful, and it's something that I think about very often, and I think we all have that in our lives.
We do.
And something I talk about in my book is we all have something, right? We all have something, not just in terms of these experiences we've had, but we all have some sort of a disadvantage, that, or something that has kept us vulnerable or insecure, or for some it's about gender, for some it's about race, ethnicity, class, religion, sexual orientation. religion, age, but it goes beyond that as well.
Right,
There's
right.
lots of people who are the epitome of privilege, white, cis, male privilege, right? And they
Right.
still have something. We all have
Right.
something. And
That's
so
true.
it's understanding, how do others perceive us? How do we perceive ourselves?
Right.
And how do we turn these things to an advantage?
Right. And if you can affect one child, that's one extra, young adult that will, really grow up appreciating the impact that you have.
Yeah, I mean, it's one. We always think about it as like helping one life, but we don't see that cumulative value. It's
Right,
how I think
right.
about myself as if I think about what could I have, all of the things that I would have wanted to achieve. If I think about what could I achieve in 10 years or 20 years, and all of the things that I could do, but instead, I'm a professor. I have 180 students a year.
Wow.
And if I can get this message to 180 students per
Right.
year, and they get that message,
Right.
it becomes this cumulative,
Right.
exponential effect.
Right.
And I think the book is one of the reasons why I really want to get the book into the hands, especially of those people who have given up,
Right.
or have felt like they're hitting the same wall
That's
over and
true.
over and over
Right.
again, is
Yeah.
because of this cumulative effect.
That's true, because
Yeah.
you are a true influencer in that sense.
Well, I'm not sure that anyone would ever like attach influencer and professor in the same. I don't have that influencer vibe, but I'd like to think that I influence,
Right.
and that there is a way that I
Yes,
influence
yes,
without that
yes,
typical.
yeah.
So
because
yeah.
I definitely do think that word influencer has become such a negative connotation nowadays because of all the social media influencers out there.
It almost assumes that I'm like, oh, if I'm an influencer, well, I have to be dressing. Like I have to like up my wardrobe, and I need to, right?
You need to love the camera.
That I do, right? And so, I feel like there's lots of sort of labels that I very much embrace, but
Right.
not with the sort of definition that it's evolved
Right.
to, right? So someone was saying the other day, they're like, well, so you're like a hacker. Like, you hacked the system, right? Like edge is almost like telling people, yes, you need to understand the rules.
Right, right.
But you need to also understand the rules so that you can go beyond the rules and you can
Right.
make your own rules. And so in some sense, you're like a hacker. And I'm
Right.
like, I guess I am, but the word hacker has this connotation
Right,
to me.
exactly.
Right? And it's the same thing as what you're saying. Like, in some ways, I aspire to be an influencer in the ways
Right.
that I can influence.
To aspire.
Yes. So,
Right, you're the influence to aspire.
yeah, or maybe I should turn this word influencer into something different, right?
Right.
Like, I'm gonna create like a professor TikTok account and have a different way that people think about influencers. So,
All right.
yeah.
So thank you. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back
Okay.
with Laura Huang.
Now you can try before you buy on Collectin. Introducing Experience, the new way to shop jewelry. Flaunt your style and express your creativity with experience. Get it today, only on Collectin.
We're back with Laura Huang. So let's talk about your book again. So your book, Edge, is very applicable to life in many various ways and different levels. So how do you see that book? Is it like a business book? Is it a self-help guide? I mean, how do you see that?
I mean, I think it's both. I think it's very applicable to work and to what we're trying to strive for in our careers and our life sort of purpose. But I also think it's very developmental in terms of like being a self-development book where it applies outside of business and life, as outside of business into our lives as well. So, because I'm a business school professor, I think that it was framed from the beginning as a business trade book, a book for leaders and individuals within organizations. But in many ways, I think it's evolved to be something where people outside of business have taken and used in their lives as a guidebook as well. I mean, I've gotten so many tremendous notes and emails and from people all over the world. I mean, I think one of the most memorable is this man named Caleb who wrote me pretty soon after the book came out, and he said, I read your book, and I've been a substance abuser pretty much my entire lives, in and out of rehab centers, an alcoholic, drugs, all of these sort of things. And I read your book, and I decided that I want to stay clean. I decided again that I want to stay clean. And I've now been clean for 1 week. And I was so touched. I wrote this really long email about like how grateful I am that he reached out, and how it's so wonderful, and that that he can do it, and all of these sort of things. And then I stopped and I deleted the entire email. And I wrote him back and I said, there's nothing else I would love more than to get the same email from you next week.
Ah, nice.
And every week he's now sent me an email saying, I've now been clean 2 weeks. I've now been clean 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 12 weeks, 26 weeks.
And thus you're the teacher.
And I mean, it was something, and I think, that's what I think this book means to me in terms of not only has it helped him get back on his feet in terms of his own life, but now we've had this like dialogue through email exchanges where he's like, okay, and now I applied to this job, and I think there's something around where it's such a personal, like sometimes people say to me like, oh, Professor Huang, like what are the 5 steps that I should take to gain my edge? And I wish I could say like step 1, do this, step 2, do this, step 3, do this. But instead, really, it's a perspective. It's a perspective where I give this framework, this perspective for thinking about your own unique challenges, your own unique strengths and weaknesses and underestimated strengths. And then it's really about how do you hone your ability to do this. And that's what Caleb, that's what it really means to me, is that he was able to do it. It wasn't like me telling him, I'm so proud of you for doing this. I'm so glad you did this. He did it in his own way. There was something, and I don't even know what it was exactly. There was something in it that said, you know what? I want to be clean again. I want to do this. And so every week, I wanted to emphasize, like, you don't really need it. You've got this. You've got this. And that's the message that I think I wanted for my students. That's the message I wanted for readers. That's the message I wanted for, anybody who I would hope would appreciate this perspective.
That's true. Because in your book, it's very different than a lot of business books that I read. For one, the stories are really very relatable, and they're not like, some business guy doing this and that, and it's unachievable, unattainable. It's really relatable. You're a great storyteller, and you tell it in the way that it's it feels like it's everybody can understand.
I really wanted that, right? For every story that I had about Elon Musk or somebody that we know, I wanted 3 or 4 stories about Osama, who was struggling to get angel investing funding, or Beatrice, who was a woman in Spain who was trying to leave the small town that she grew up in. I wanted these stories about people who were relatable, that we could say like, yes, I've faced that kind of adversity, and look how they've done it. So I tried very hard to, and I really wanted to, but you're right, like, because I told stories about everyday sort of people. One of the disadvantages, right? Speaking about advantages and disadvantages that I've sort of faced in this is because I am a business school professor. There was this expectation that I would be telling stories about Steve Jobs and Elon Musk. And I'm also not the typical business school professor. I'm not the typical author. When we think about the business gurus out there, they're almost always white men. And here I am, an Asian woman with a first book. I'm a relatively unknown, person. I'm talking about sort of these perspectives and these theories and this framework that is pretty much very, very different from a Porter's 5 Forces or any sort of the business school curriculum that we've had. But it's been very meaningful. And so my hope is that I will be able to continue to reach people like Caleb and reach people who are in organizations that they know, like, yes, maybe I've gotten turned down for promotion after promotion after promotion, but I know that there's something. And I just need to figure out, how can I flip this in my favor? How can I take the ways in which I provide value and I enrich and really guide people so that I can achieve what I know I can achieve. That's really my entire goal here, is really taking those people and helping them know that they can be empowered to achieve those things. There's still going to be failures.
Yes,
There's
of course.
still going to be drawdowns, but that you're capable, that you're able to sort of do this.
Yeah, and you know what? I actually really liked your blog that you wrote about the books, because the way you frame the business books, like the list of business books, right? Like that's a more well-rounded appetite. Or what was your words on that?
I call it. So I realized. So I started seeing all of these lists. Of like the best, the books that every business school student should read, or the top 10 best business books, or the top 100 best business books. And there's all of these lists where, again, I realized they're all male authors, and they're predominantly white male authors. So I created my own business of what I wanted my students to read, and I called it the Well-Balanced Meal.
Yes, I thought that was very clever.
So for finance, here's breakfast, lunch, dinner, and dessert. And for marketing, here's breakfast, lunch, dinner, and dessert. And for each of those, I had a book that, breakfast is like that hearty, like here's what you want to start off the day. Lunch is like you're sustaining yourself. You're learning more. Dinner is like, okay, and then dessert is like this kind of fun kind of thing. And so I had these books, and it's diverse in terms of gender, in terms of race, in terms of religion, sexual orientation, class, in terms of all of these different authors. And the funny thing is, in the original version, I did not have my own book on it. And I started getting all of these emails that are like, why did you not put your own book on this sort of thing? So this shows you how bad I am at
the Asian in you, the Asian humbleness.
The marketing and the PR and all of this sort of stuff. And I was like, well, I don't deserve to be on this list yet. And then everyone was like, no, you need. So I've now, like, I keep expanding the list. And so, but yeah.
No, that's nice. You know what I found was like, hey, she has a thing with the 4 steps. Like everything that you teach is about 4 steps. Do you realize? I don't know if you realize that. It's like 1, 2, 3, like the well-balanced diet. It's like what you have
breakfast,
4
lunch, dinner, and dessert.
And your book has 4.
EDGE.
Right.
Well, I don't know, because the number 4 is not very fortuitous in Asian culture. So I don't know. Maybe I'm gonna have to turn that to an advantage somehow as well.
Yeah, but you know what I find is like either 3 or 4 works really well. Like for us, we have a 4. Like we always like, hey, our whole company culture is about care. So we have like the care, like curiosity. We have our little acronyms and 4 steps. I personally find like even in sales and products, if I go any more than 3 or 4 steps, then you pretty much lose your audience.
I know, but 8 is supposed to be that number, right? 8
really? 8?
In Asian culture, 8 is like your number, right? Yeah. Anyways, but 8's a lot. So maybe 4 and 4.
Right.
Like I think.
And I know you have you've done a lot of research about, and you talk about like gut instinct. Yeah. Especially for someone who's like engineering, right? Yeah. Engineering background, and it's really more. What's your perspective on that? Because it goes against your grain, basically.
Totally. Yeah. So all of my earliest research was on gut feel and intuition, and how do we make decisions? And you're absolutely right. I came from a very technical background. I was an engineer by training, and what I realized really early on in my career was that when we make decisions, a lot of times we are using our intuition or our gut feel to make it. And then what we do is we post hoc rationalize. And we look for data or information to sort of support that. And I'll tell you a really quick story to kind of that illustrates this. When I first started working in investment banking, the very first project that I was on was this mergers and acquisitions deal. It was this M&A deal where the VP said, we need you to help our client figure out who they should acquire, company A, company B, or company C. And so we need you to go and make this economic model, model to tell us whether or not A, B, or C should be who we acquire. So my team and I spent 2 months working on this model with different interest rates, different states of the world, different assumptions. We presented it to the VP and the client, and we said, you should go with target B. Here's why. And the VP turned to me, and I'll never forget, he said, this is an amazing model. This should be like an industry standard. I can tell you have everything in, like the assumptions, the interest rates, all of this. There's only one problem. The problem is we already decided we're going with company A. So can you now redo the model to make it say that we should go with company A?
Right.
So I tell this example because this is how we make decisions for whatever reason. Because of our intuition or because of social information or because we've already decided we're going with company A. We now post hoc find the data to say that company A is the right decision. And so all of my earliest research was looking at how do we balance our implicit assumptions, the signals, the cues, our intuition vis-a-vis the hard data, the financials, the numbers. How do we actually really use all of this hard data, or is that hard data there to sort of allow us to shape it and to interpret it and slice it in certain ways that really supports what our intuition already told us to do? And so I think that technical background really pinpointed that to me, that there's these two different ways that we make decision, and it's really intertangled and it's intertwined. And the more we can understand how we perceive things, the more we understand the signals, the cues, the perceptions, the stereotypes, the intuitions, the better off we are in understanding how these two intermingle and intertwine.
That's true. Well, that's the most well-explained gut feeling, gut instinct explanation I've heard.
Well, and I think that's really like that was what I started studying out was, more than a decade ago. That's what I first started studying was how do we quantify the unquantifiable? How do we quantify our intuition? And I think that's gone into everything that I've studied subsequently, because really gaining an edge is about how do you hone your intuition? How do you hone your ability to see how others see you so that you can guide those perceptions, so that you are empowered to really and that's really where that intuition piece kicks in.
That's true. So. Yeah, because in some ways it's very, I guess you're putting it in words because a lot of people tell me that my business decisions are all gut instinct, but I'm like telling them, no, I don't think so. Like
you shouldn't be apologetic about it, right? Because we are in a society where we are almost apologetic about like now I got to find data to support this.
Or that makes me very women or very emotional, right?
But your instincts and your intuition, your gut feel, it's really that's the base. It's come about because of prototypes and schemas and your mental models and all of these things have gotten to you to where you are. And there's a lot of it data that is embedded in that as well. So there's no reason to be apologetic about that. And I think that's something that I talk a lot about as well is like honing your intuition. That's sometimes knowing when you should chuck out all the data.
That's true.
It's about knowing intuition is about knowing when you should actually use the data and not be guided by other things. But sometimes it's also following your intuition and throwing out all the other data because the data leads you astray.
That's true. Okay, so now do you think men or women are different in that the way they make their decisions based on gut instinct?
I have a friend who teases me often about saying, you're like a closet biological existentialist, or
that's a big one.
Biological essentialism, which is essentially this argument, this biological essentialism is this argument that men and women have certain things that they are pre-prescribed to be better or worse at, right? And the reason why she sort of says this is because I tell this story about how my daughter, when my daughter was really little, we didn't do anything differently with her, right? We didn't dress her in pink, we didn't dress her in red, we didn't talk about princesses, we didn't talk about any of the sort of stereotypical feminine type things that but yet my daughter, before she even started school, before she even had social influences, was really like into princesses. She wanted stories about princesses. She was attracted to more. Right. And so I was telling this friend of mine, like, so, sometimes I think that there are just, and so your question is sort of along those lines, right? Right. I think that women definitely have advantages in terms of decision making, and I think men have advantages in terms of decision making, and I think there are different advantages that men and women carry in terms of when they're making decisions. Right. So I think it really comes down to what type of decision is it? What are the contextual factors? What are the nuances around this decision? And how can we actually optimize the way in which we make these decisions based on who we are, the context, the environment, all of these various different factors. Right. And so I don't think one is better or worse than the other. But I think where we get into trouble is, again, when we try and say all decisions are created equal, and therefore this gender or this race or this type of person is better at making these decisions. Right. I also think that there are ebbs and flows. So you can take the same person with the same decision, and that person will make different decisions based on nuances and circumstances. So another way to sort of say this, is you change one variable. Right. Here, I'm putting on my engineering brain here. But if you take an equation, you change one variable, and the entire equation changes, right? So you change the industry that you're operating in, you change the mix of people that you're interacting with, you change one variable, and all of these things sort of shift. Right. So what is important from an individual level or from a leader's perspective is being able to understand these nuances. And these nuances include things like situational arrogance, the intent versus impact, all of these sort of things that I talk about with my students and talk about in the book as well. Right.
That one story that you had about your daughter and the princess. Yeah. Because I was like, oh, that was very clever. So because I have a 6-year-old and she naturally actually also was into the princess before that, and I was purposefully actually not giving her pink and not letting her be the Disney princess fan. But then she was attracted to it, and she goes towards it. And I love that story about your husband. Yep. Can you telling your daughter about the princess and how you twisted it?
Right. So it was so as I kind of mentioned, my daughter, every night she was really into princesses, and we didn't really understand why. And so every night we'd say, what kind of story do you want us to read to you tonight? And she'd say, I want a princess story. And my husband would be like, oh, what about a story about an engineer? Or what a story about a doctor? Or a story about an architect? And she's like, no, princesses. So he started telling her these stories about Princess Ashley, who is a princess engineer, or Princess Claire, who was a princess architect. And so it was always a character who was both a princess and something else. And so it was like Princess Ashley was this princess engineer who would like save her king, her father the king had some big travesty in the kingdom, and she had to go in there and save it with her tools and her engineering skills. And so I and I loved it because I loved that he sort of embraced who she was and wanting to hear these princess stories, but also wanted her to know that you can do anything you want to do.
Right.
You can be an engineer, you can be an architect, you can be a doctor, you can be any of these sort of jobs and so I secretly started writing these down. Like I would hear him telling these stories, and so I would write them down.
Right.
And then my daughter and I actually turned them into a children's book series where we wrote them, we created illustrations, we found an illustrator, and they're actually we never actually published. They're like they're on Kindle, right? They're sort of, but we never published them into actual books. But we have the hardcover copies just for our own families,
so
memorabilia.
Sweet. Yeah.
but they are on Kindle because we had family members and people who wanted to kind of see them. But it was something where we wanted to embrace, as I mentioned, all of those, turning it into an advantage from the standpoint of you can still own who you are while still being able to reflect upon and develop and guide the other pieces. Right.
Now, because we all grow up with Taiwanese parents, which like hardworking ethics is very important, and they kind of like ingrain that in you when you're growing up. But you're basically advocating, well, that's not enough anymore, right? The world has changed so much that you need to really gain an edge. So how do you tell your audience or someone who just say, hey, all you have to do is just work really, really hard and you'll achieve everything? I mean,
this is something that so many of us are taught from a young age.
Right.
I mean, I certainly was taught this all throughout, even now, right? Sometimes I hear, just put your head down and work hard.
Right,
it will speak for itself. And so we're constantly being told, work hard, work hard, work hard. We have such a love affair with hard work, grit, right? Like how many times do we tell people, like, work hard, have grit. And here's the thing. I mean, hard work and grit, they are critical. I would never say that they are not critical.
Right.
But hard work and grit alone are not enough.
Right.
And when we have this love affair with grit, we tend to forget that there's so many other pieces to it. So the main premise of my book, and even we spoke about the E, D, G, E. The E stands for enrich, the D stands for delight, the G stands for guide, and the final E stands for effort and hard work.
Right.
And effort and hard work come last in my framework. They're critical.
Yeah.
They're one of the four.
yes.
But it comes last because when we are often told that hard work will speak for itself.
Right.
But in fact, effort and hard work, when you know how you enrich and delight and guide, that's when your effort and hard work hardest for you.
Right, that's true.
When you put it last, like effort and hard work come last.
Right.
Because when you understand these perceptions, and you understand how you enrich, and you understand how you delight, and you understand how you can guide the perceptions of others, that's when you get those tailwinds. That's when your effort and hard work actually pay off and speak for itself, and even more, you get that hard work plus.
Right.
And so, we often hear things like, women sometimes have to work twice as hard for half the amount of benefits.
Right.
Well, I say, why not work twice as hard for twice the amount of benefits?
Right. That's
true. What you can get when you know how you enrich and delight and guide.
Right.
So that effort and hard work harder for you, and you gain that edge.
Right.
That's when you sort of get those.
Right. So basically work smart with your principles rather than just work hard.
Absolutely. That hard work plus is understanding that success and outcomes are not dictated
That's
just
true.
based on hard work.
That's true because, it's funny because I'm in a CEO group and a lot of guys in there are like, you're not working hard enough. I'm like, well, what is hard enough for you? Because it's not about the number of hours that you spent in the office, It's about working smartly for your business and for the future. But then, a lot of people get caught up in that. You're right, the hard work and then effort. And they're like, well, you're not waking up at 4 and you're not, taking a cold shower and you're not, not, spending 80 hours a week, or 100 hours, and you're not, you actually have family and you actually have a balance in your life. I'm like, you know what? I think that's just being a smart CEO or being a woman that's, well-rounded, that yes, we have work and we have, but we also have a family and we want to balance everything. Yeah. And I think that's, that's something that as women we should be very proud of, that we're able to, balance everything.
I think another way to say this is anyone who is successful works hard.
Right.
Everyone who is successful works hard and has grit. Mm-hmm. There's also a lot of people who work hard and have grit but are not successful.
That's true.
What is the difference? What is the difference between those who have it and those who don't? And I believe it's those who have cultivated and been able to gain an edge and understand that where their hard work does. Right. So I think that's and I think that's what a lot of people struggle with, is that I've put in the hard work.
Right.
I do work really hard and I've been doing all of these things. Why do I still feel like I'm getting pushed down? Why do I still feel like I'm not able to reach the sort of aspirations that I'm looking for? Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to throw you a curveball.
Sure, I love curveballs.
So with all that hard work, how do you de-stress at the end of a day?
I think there's a lot of different things that I do. I love reading, and in fact, what happens is I end up reading the opposite of the types of things that I typically have to read, or that most of what I read is fiction. So even though I write nonfiction, I love just reading nonfiction of all sorts of different kinds. I also I run. I'm not a good runner, but I run. It's changed since having kids. The ways in which I de-stress has changed significantly. But there's not one thing that I do to sort of de-stress. I think it's a variety of different things where I'm not naturally somebody who gets stressed easily. I have a lot of vices and a lot of faults, but being stressed easily is not something that happens. I mainly get stressed more because I know my working style and I know what works and what doesn't work. And there's certain things that I have to do that are opposite from my working style. Like I am not great with large amounts of uncertainty. I'm not great with lots of things that I study. Right. I'm not great with big amounts of uncertainty. I'm that's why I have to surround myself with really good people who compliment me. Well, so.
No, but great leaders also surround themselves with a lot of great people, because it takes a tribe. It takes a group of people.
With good people, it's really, you really have to, when you find good people, you have to really you have to nurture those.
Right.
Because it's this simultaneous, I've realized, with finding good people, and I talk about this in the book as well, is you need to have overlap in terms of some really key things. Because when we say surround yourself with good people who have different skill sets than you, that can also go horrendously wrong. You need to be able to find that those key things that you overlap on, you see eye to eye on really clearly and really quickly, and then know that you've got these very complementary skills. And so a lot of even founding teams, the reason they go wrong is because they've got lots of the complementary skills, but they haven't found that beautiful overlap that allows them to
work together and stay together, which is very, very hard in a founding team. So what's next for you?
Well, so, my day job, I continue to sort of teach and do research. So I'm continuing to do research a lot in this area around disadvantage and inequality and stereotypes and how we can flip things to our advantage. I teach a course. I teach entrepreneurship, a course called Founder's Journey, which is around all of the people issues of starting a company, all of the sort of nitty-gritty people issues. And, someday there will be a book too. I have lots of ideas going in and out of my head. But I think, one of my primary focuses is I really care a lot about Project EMpower and this nonprofit and charity that we're working on. And it's really my way of taking all of the experiences I've had and the work that I've done and really giving back in a way that I think in a way that I can give back in a really effective way. There's lots of things that I could be doing, but this really feels like I'm able to make a difference. I mentioned Caleb and I mentioned people that I've gotten notes from. And so, trying to find ways to continue doing it's not my natural. I've never really started a nonprofit or a charity, but I believe so much in this in a way that I haven't believed in something in a really long time, and so continue to take that forward in terms of the book matching program and the workshops and the mentoring and all of the pieces that I hope that I hoped that the messages of this would get across to readers, but now it's getting across to people who would have been readers but don't have the opportunity to necessarily have been readers.
That's true. Well, thank you, Laura.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura, for joining us today and sharing your amazing stories. Congratulations on your book, Edge. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Goodreads. And don't forget, it's very important to leave a review online and share with your friends. It's an awesome book. I read it page by page and took notes, which is actually something that I don't do very often. So it's very nice that you can come and join us today. And for all of you who haven't followed Laura online or on social media, you could find her on LinkedIn, Twitter, IG, or Facebook, and even on YouTube. Or you can go directly to her webpage at laurahuang.net. Subscribe to her newsletter. And of course, if you enjoy the podcast today, you need to subscribe to our podcast and check out our videos on our website, girlinfluencepower.com, or on Collectin's YouTube channel. Well, there you have it, Laura Huang.